Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the Common Bond Community's third annual Affordable Housing Forum. I'm Derek Madsen, staff member here at Common Bond. I'd just like to welcome everyone and thank you for attending this year's forum. As you know, this has been an in-person event in the past, and so we're grateful that folks have decided to join us this year in the digital environment for what is shaping up to be a really great conversation among our panelists. Before we get started today, I'd just like to take one quick moment to recognize our sponsors for today's event. Those folks are Hush Blackwell, Catalyst Construction, U.S. Bank, and U.S. Bank Wealth Management. And I'd like to say a special thank you to those folks for stepping up and supporting this event with a generous contribution. It just really shows their support of this work that we're all doing together, and we're very grateful for their sponsorship. So thank you. Today, our moderator is going to be Deidre Schmidt, President and CEO of Common Bond Communities. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Deidre and our panelists.
Great, thanks a lot, Derek. And we have a deep and meaty conversation planned today. So I'm gonna try to be as brief as possible. I really appreciate the time of our panelists, our discussants today. I do a brief introduction of them so we can hear directly from them as soon as possible. So I want to start by introducing Omkar Sawardekar. And if you could just give a little wave so that folks know who they're watching. Omkar is a diversity and inclusion specialist and an organizational change consultant. He works with a wide range of clients in clinical settings and in the context of in a wide range of demographic and acuity levels. He's an experienced individual, group, and family therapist, and he's been working with Common Bond since the start of 2021, and we're pleased to have his guidance. Omkar describes that he is driven by the tenets that relationships rooted in community are central to individual and societal healing, and that the best healing practices grow from interdisciplinary methodologies. He's committed to collaboratively developing tools that promote culturally responsive care. So thank you, Omkar, for joining us here today and for helping us in a year that we've really benefited.
Thank you.
I also want to introduce Martina Gollin-Graves. Martina, give a wave. Thank you. Martina is president and CEO at Mental Health America of Wisconsin, known as MHA, where she's been on the job for 16 years. This includes advocacy efforts that support improved suicide prevention efforts across Wisconsin and expanded access to community-based mental health services for the most vulnerable community members. She also served as the co-chair of the Milwaukee Health Task Force for 5 years and is one of the original members of the Milwaukee Latino Health Coalition's Mental Health Action Team. Her core belief is that there is no health without mental health. And she's driven by the commitment to promote mental health as a critical component of overall wellness. So thank you, Martina, for your good work and for being with us today. And finally, Reverend Walter Lanier. He is thank you. Hello, Walter, welcome. He is the senior pastor of Progressive Baptist Church of Milwaukee and has a 30-year track record of innovation and service to the Milwaukee community. He also serves as director of student resources at the Milwaukee Area Technical College, where he created the college's Men of Color Initiative. He's founded the Great Lakes Urban Empowerment Center and the Miracle Network, which we'll hear more about in a little bit. Works with community leaders and advocates to raise awareness and decrease stigma around mental illness. And Walter describes himself as a husband, a father, a lawyer, a pastor, a teacher, an educator, and a social entrepreneur with deep commitment to being a liberating force in Milwaukee. Walter, thank you for that and for joining us today. Really appreciate all of you. I'd like to just say a couple words about Common Bond. Some of you know our organization well, but for those of you who don't, we are a regional nonprofit organization focused with a mission on the provision of housing and services. And we support folks in building their best lives on the foundation of housing. We have noticed for many years the prevalence of mental health challenges and their relationship to people's ability to maintain stable housing. And I remember a number of years back, we had a listening session between our board of directors and staff who work on the ground directly with residents on a day-to-day basis. And the number one takeaway from that discussion years ago on the part of our board was how intimately related housing stability, the ability to build a stable life and prosper, is tied to mental health. And how much, as housing and service providers, we are brought into health, mental health and maintenance of it. And so we decided to take on an initiative benefiting from some helpful partners and experts in the field that could help us define our approach to mental health. And this is in the context of housing and really helping at this initiative to help us build this concept of what kind of capacity and resilience we need as an organization to respond to resident needs. And this is how we came to be working with Omkar this year. Of course, all of you know 2020 has been a challenging year. And so we're even more grateful to have started this work just in the nick of time before the pandemic hit, because of course the stressors that individuals and organizations and our society as a whole are under are exacerbating some of the underlying issues that we had already come to recognize. But perhaps a silver lining in all of this, as I think about it, is that I see indications that more and more people are recognizing the importance of the maintenance of mental health and the reduction in some stigma in all of our ability to talk about the importance of mental health and how it contributes to everything else in our lives. So I would like to start maybe with you, Omkar. This is a subject that can be intimidating for folks and maybe new for folks tuning in today. So I want to start with building some shared language among us for the conversation. Could you give us a definition of mental health, and could you help us understand maybe how you think about it differently in community-based work versus clinical work?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's so good to be here. My name is Omkar. I use he, him, his pronouns. Thank you, Deidre, so much for having me, and I'm so excited to be here with everybody. It's a simple question, and in some ways it's incredibly complex. And the most helpful thing that I find that I'm interested in kind of creating some shared language on is if we think of physical health and you ask an average person, what's important around physical health? Almost everybody would be able to give you a list of 3 to 5 things, right? They wouldn't say, hey, I'm not a doctor. I have no idea, right? So they would say, oh, I need to exercise. Maybe I need to eat more vegetables, stretch, some different things, drink more water. And so that's what I'm interested in around mental health. Like, what are those shared things that can be somewhat universal that anybody can say, this is what it looks like? And one of those things that feels really important is this window of tolerance, right? Our ability to be engaged with our world in a way that feels cool, calm, collected, integrated, where we're not too much into anxiety, right? We're certainly affected by things. We can move towards anxiety, and we're not too much into depression, right? And we're able to self-correct. And that's kind of being in that flow state is one way I like to think of as being healthy. And now, even that is an incredibly complex concept, right? In addition to that, I want to name how this looks different in community settings and in institutional setting. And one of the biggest ways that we're seeing this show up is the need to pay attention more and more to collective mental health, right? That our nervous systems are connected, we are syncing up with each other, and that there is a tendency to both collectively be anxious and collectively shut down, as we can see in this year. I think so much of the toilet paper, when we were all rushing out and getting toilet paper, our anxiety played off each other, right? And how do we collectively meet that? So in some ways I've complicated the answer, and I hope that's good, and we'll kind of work through some of that complexity together.
Thanks, Omkar. Martina, maybe I could ask you to share some examples of how you're showing up in the community-based work, you know, with a wide variety of services. How do you describe this work in helping people to understand the key needs of individuals and communities as Omkar has started to open up for us?
Yeah, thank you, Omkar, for kind of setting the stage. It's a perfect segue. You know, this work is no longer, when I say this work, mental health and supporting mental health and wellness, I just truly believe it is no longer solely focused on getting individuals into traditional treatment, like outpatient services or getting them psychotropic medication or case management, all of which my organization offers, right? That is a component that helps us move people towards wellness. But I want us today to hopefully be able to expand this conversation because myself and my organization and the mental health community in general, we just no longer believe that it's just about getting the individual help. This work is operating from a broader scope, and Omkar kind of alluded to that, where the goal is to achieve community wellness, right? And so if you want healthy individuals, you have to have healthy communities. And not just for some folks, but for everyone. And a lot of the work that Mental Health America does is focused on really broadening the perspective of how mental health and achieving mental wellness, right? That's like a whole different concept, and how achieving mental wellness is impacted by this. Here's the kind of golden nugget for me, impacted by social determinants of health. And for those who aren't as familiar, those are conditions that impact the places where people live, where we learn, where we work, where we play, and they really do have an impact on our quality of life. And so not everyone gets that, and a person's social environment has a great impact on their mental and physical health outcomes. For example, like housing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, Walter, I know you've done so much work on this, bringing these kinds of issues forward as well. Is there something that you think is important for folks on this conference to understand about individuals and their ability to access resources around mental health?
Thank you, and thank you for Omkar and Martina. Glad to meet you, Omkar and Martina, and I have collaborated and worked together for years, so it's great to be on this panel with each of you. You know, I was reading through the intros and it said something about expertise.
Hold on just a second. Go ahead, Walter. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So it said something about expertise, and I had to reflect on what is my expertise, because I'm a bit of a jack of all trades and master of none. But I really go to a concept that I've mentioned earlier by Dr. King, which is beloved community. And Dr. King talked about building beloved community, together in peace and love in beloved community. And I would say that's probably my strength. And that is what I see to be most critical. And that's what we do at the Miracle Table. We have a diversity of people at the table, race, gender, socioeconomic background, lived experience, and over 8 years have really built a transformative table. And by building that transformative table, we also have been transformative in the church that I lead, where I am pastor. So not only looking at us as individuals and individual resilience, but community resilience. What is the shape and the culture of the community? There's an article that I reference often, the title of which it says, "Self-care is not enough, community care is required." It says that to just impose on somebody the idea that they must take care of themselves, if the culture, the community is not edifying, encouraging, creating space for that self-care, is actually a greater stressor. And so when we talk about access and community, all of us on here know that to access mental health systems is very complex. The systems are complex. You know, I've got 2 or 3 degrees. When I'm in a room often discussing these issues, a lot of the people there have 2 to 3 degrees. And between us, we still have challenges figuring out how to navigate this complex system. And so that's a challenge, and that's where systems need to improve, need to do a better job of articulating how people can access the information, how they can access the systems. That's one of the things we do at the Miracle Table, is fill in that knowledge gap, that information sharing gap to help people to close the gap. Also, same in other institutions. I also serve at MATC as the Director of Student Resources and also the Director of Counseling Services, which is relatively new. And we're a nice sized institution and we have that same challenge. How do we take this relatively big bureaucracy and simplify it in a manner that people can access all information, but particularly mental health information, because we've got that other burden of stigma, so people do not necessarily want to ask. Challenging already, even more so if there's a stigma about it.
Absolutely.
Walter,
You know,
I thought I had a lot on my plate.
you know, I just to segue here a little bit, Walter, what you're identifying here, this gap between what people need and what they have access to for all sorts of reasons, right? You know, that is a real thing, and we know that it's disparate, right? So the gap is greater for people of color, the gap is greater for low-income folks, and this is a gap that we observe all the time with Common Bond residents, and part of why we wanted to start this work with Omkar. So Omkar, can I ask you to talk and maybe provide an example of how you're helping us equip our staff who are helping residents close these gaps and get more access to what they need?
Yeah, this is a big question, right? And when we started this project, one of the first conversations with Derek was about this gap. And so at the one end, right, and this is, let's say, all under the traditional mental health system, like Martina talked about, you know, psychiatry, individual therapy, case management. And again, mental health, right, to add to the breadth, is doesn't have to look like just going to a therapist, right? It can be a lot of different things for people. Having said that, that is sort of a deep and accessible, or that's a field, right, that's available, psychiatry, and that's sort of, you refer to as this traditional field of access to mental health services, right? And so you have people at one end who have insurance and have money and have time and can, like Walter talked about, like on some level navigate these systems and advocate for themselves and find those resources and services. And then you have people at the other end who are kind of being caught by our safety net that are having mental health crises and have some supports on that end or ending up in institutions. And there's a lot of challenges on that end as well. But then you have this huge group in the middle who may never go see a therapist, who may never, you know, think they have a mental health issue. And how do we make this accessible to that group, right? And I think of that as all of Common Bond's residents in some way are in that group. You know, how do we make these communities mentally safe? How do we make them culturally responsive? How do we make them inclusive? How do we engage conflict in those spaces? And so that is the work that we've been exploring and been doing with the staff at Common Bond, right? Like, what are some basic skill sets? Is it de-escalation? Is it conflict management? How do you set healthy boundaries? You know, how do you know about how your own stuff might be playing out into the situation? So that's really been where we've been focusing that work with Common Bond, is how do we equip folks working directly with staff to be able to assess to some degree and engage in a way that they're not causing more harm, not taking on more than they need to, but also providing a supportive space.
Omkar, can I ask you to give, without exposing personal information, can you give an example?
Yeah, could you share a little bit about, what type of example, like to speak to?
So when
Yes.
You know, you were naming a bunch of kind of building blocks of competency and capacity that we've been naming and figuring out how to provide and support Common Bond staff in developing. And one of the things you named is, for instance, recognize, cultural dynamics, right?
Yeah.
In the relationship, and the importance of setting boundaries. That's another example you gave.
Yeah.
Can you, because you have so many, can you just give a real life example of how one of those dynamics that you are describing shows up in an actual relationship?
Yeah, I'm thinking yesterday we were having a consultation space around supporting someone that has been homeless to get into housing. And so you're in that situation dealing with all of these challenges, this person's anxiety, mental health history, trauma, depression, and a traumatic brain injury. All of that was contributing to how they were orienting in a way that was being very crisis driven, right? Legitimately so. But then also this was setting off the own stuff, right? We're not robots. This is a big thing that I share. And we don't have to be. We don't have to kind of deny our own feelings, and we're going to be affected by the work. So the person working with this person was triggered in their own stuff, right? And we all bring, I use the word like these neuroses to work, right? Like my desire to be this kind of vulnerable, right? Like to get approval from my mother is going to get projected onto my female supervisor, right? So we're all bringing these sorts of things. Like, I want to do a good job, I'm not doing enough, our notions around justice. And so when all of that shows up, right, we need to kind of have space to pause and be like, oh, I might do the best work I can do, and this resident may never like me, and because I don't integrate that into my consciousness, I might be spinning all my time to get this person to like me, rather than pausing and saying, hey, I just need to set some clear boundaries about the limits of my actions, as long as it's ethical and meeting my responsibilities. And then this is the other piece with boundaries. It's like, how do I set boundaries from a place that recognizes the person's need, right? Not from a rigid place, but like, I know you're hurting. I know you're scared. I know you're overwhelmed. And like I said, I'll get back to you when I have a chance, which is going to be in 48 hours, right? Like, that skill is a very important skill that we need to practice together.
One thing I would observe, Omkar, that's been profound about the learning that we've been doing with you is this sense that we need to reflect on ourselves as much as we need to respond to the needs of another person, and potentially even break down some orientation to fix another person. And that's been, I think for many folks, a real aha. I want to invite Martina and Walter. Do you have some reflections on anything that Omkar just shared, or examples from work that you've been doing or seeing that you think are important for folks tuning in?
I can jump in. I really would like to explore this notion about what people need and what they have access to. I think as providers, as professionals, and if you can see my air quotes, I think a lot of times we make assumptions, right? So I might approach this from a clinical lens or a provider lens, and I think we get into a lot of trouble. We make assumptions about what we think people need. And so COVID has just, removed the curtain and has unveiled horrific disparities. And one of the things in our community here in Milwaukee that we're noticing, right? So mental health. I sit on a million mental health related committees, but there's one initiative that is really getting traction here. We have a civic response team, and all the teams are identified as social determinants of health. And so I happen to be on the mental health. And we were focused on mental health. And initially we started looking at those traditional mental health services. And what we realized, they didn't want to hear from the professionals. They wanted to hear from the trusted individuals in their communities, whether that was a community organizer, whether that was a peer support specialist. And then, so we started to leverage those folks. They were trusted individuals. Please go find out what people need. And so the gap in terms of access to PPE, in terms of access to technical assistance, internet, equipment, et cetera, it was broad. And so I just encourage us to really, really stop and listen and find out what people really need, because oftentimes they're telling us, but we just ignore and we move on to what we think they need. And so ultimately what people were telling us now and 15 years ago, oftentimes it's not available in the community in the way that people need it. And so it's really important that we start to listen. So housing, for example, right? We all want to get people into housing, but I think we're learning, and that's part of what your organization is doing, is supporting people, realizing that just getting people a roof over their head is only a small fraction of what people need. And getting them the additional supports is where we start to get traction and really see success. Mm-hmm. So that's how we start to close the gap, is when we start to find out what people really need. Yep, I need a house, but I also need a job. I also need steady income. I also need access to healthcare and good education for my kids. And I'll stop because I could go on and on. But we often, oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And so I think it's really important that we listen to what our folks are telling us that they really need and make that a priority instead of us assuming we know.
Yeah. Walter, did you want to jump in here before we kind of pivot a little bit?
Sure, I'll jump in, and I think I'm probably going to say almost the same thing Martina said, just a slightly different way. I also have a law degree and I'm a practicing attorney, so very much a system thinker and a problem solver. And I want to lift up three things: complexity, compliance, and simplicity. A lot of our organizations that are dealing with housing or mental health are very complex. One. Two, they're also very compliance driven. And those two things can create angst for administrators, for service providers. Okay, I've got to have the information. It's got to be precise. It's got to be a particular way. I've got to check the box on the compliance. I've got to make sure I'm doing this thing, and we can miss out on the person in front of us. And so that third thing, that simplicity, what I try to do for myself, first of all, is how do I simplify this so there's something that I can do that's manageable. I remember when we started the Miracle Mental Health Network at the church, my health and wellness ministry leader, who comes from a health and wellness background, her head was like swelling when we started talking about the nuances and the diagnosis and understanding symptoms. And then I would say, whoa, wait a minute. We don't have to diagnose anything. We don't have to fix anything. We don't have to solve anybody. That's not our task. It's not our function. Not that people need to be fixed or solved. What I learned from some of my studies is just about being the less anxious presence. I learned that from the pastoral counseling paradigm. And can we be the less anxious presence in the moment? Can I attend to the person in front of me and hear them? And oftentimes that is the first step to building some communication. I've listened to you. I'm not leaping in trying to tell you what to do, trying to diagnose you, trying to fix you, trying to fight with you. But in this moment in time, I'm here listening. And so we all have the capacity to do that, whether it's at Common Bond or Mental Health America or Progressive Baptist Church or MATC, is take a moment and listen and give that person our full attention. And so there's rich complexity that's very real, and we don't deny that, but finding that simplicity space, here's something that I can do with this person that's in front of me. And I think that that's very helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate those set of comments. One of the things that pains me about the industry, I'll use that term, that we work in, is the level of complexity and the compliance requirements that we have in doing this work, right? And I would get rid of most of that if I could. But in order to give people access to the housing that we have, for instance, we have to help folks go through that compliance process, which can be done in different ways, right? Can we be that calming presence, that simplifying presence to ease the burden of that we wish were not there, right? And is that a way we can contribute to people's overall well-being? Let's talk specifically about housing a little bit because it's starting to come up. So, we are a housing organization. Martina said we can't assume what people need, but housing is a pretty fundamental need. Shelter is a fundamental need, and we do believe, as did our founders, that it's essential for all kinds of well-being, including community well-being and equitable opportunity in communities. And so this is an area that we invest deeply in. And we have, as I said earlier, recognized this incredible importance of mental health and the ability to maintain mental wellness in order to maintain housing stability, right? And not only individual housing stability, but we know firsthand that even one individual in a community who is under great distress can disrupt the comfort and the effectiveness of housing for a whole housing community and maybe even their neighbors, right? So I'd like to just hear your reflections on leaders in mental health service programming, Martina and Walter. How do you see housing showing up as an issue with the individuals you work with your organizations, and in communities you're serving?
Walter, I went first last time. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. It's the number one issue in all of the spheres I operate. Milwaukee County Mental Health Board, I serve on that board. At MATC, number one, one or two for students. It's not food insecurity, it's housing. At Progressive Baptist Church, I can think of two members that I've been working with, three members recently in the past couple months who have mental health diagnoses and the added stress of being housing insecure. It's absolutely the number one issue. And I remember Omkar, before I became a slight overachiever, I dropped out of college my first year. And so there was a season where, where I was unstable and without housing and sleeping on couches and stuff like that. And it shifts your orientation. And then if you add on top of that, I'm just striving to navigate my mental health and mental wellness in a complex system. And I don't have a stable address, that's very foundational. And so it shows up. It's the number one issue in all of those places. I'm appreciative in those institutions that we've worked to do some things. MATC has a housing initiative to get 195 beds, recognizing that that's a need for our students. So I'm really excited about that. Milwaukee County Mental Health Board has an initiative, some of you probably familiar with. It's Milwaukee County in partnership, I think, with the city, Housing First. But it is far and away the issue that arises most frequently. And then if we add, that doesn't even get into the dynamic of evictions and how, not all, but how landlords, we know Eviction, the book by Matthew Desmond, how exploitative some landlords can be, and how much more so if you're working with somebody who's trying to navigate mental health and mental illness. So yeah, very critical. And we have collective work to do to create more stability. So very appreciative of what you all do.
I echo that. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I used to be a mental health provider myself, working with individuals and families. And I've come to the realization that I have to start the conversation from a place of reminding people that housing is a right. It's not a privilege. And I think oftentimes when we are talking about people needing housing, and what they have to do to keep it, that we really forget that it's a right, and that as Walter said, it's foundational. You know, and it's always been important to help stabilize people. You know, we can use therapy and therapeutic interventions to help improve coping strategies and, you know, medication for chemical imbalances. But even when all that is in place, life stressors can interrupt the best wellness plan. And so my organization, we work with a lot of parents living with mental health challenges who are trying to raise minor children. So, right, parents, children, housing, but that sentence just goes together, right? But it's not the reality for a lot of families in our community. And housing is more often than not the number one challenge, just like Walter mentioned, for maintaining mental wellness. And so, you know, we kind of have been talking about mental health, and I think maybe interchanging the label of mental illness, mental health. I think we have two sets of people, and Omkar started talking about this a little bit. We have people who have chronic and persistent mental illness, right? And they need housing first and foremost, but they also need sometimes a different set of supports versus people who have situational mental health issues that often are a result of these life stressors, like losing housing or having medical issues, or I could go on and on there. So when people don't have safe and affordable housing for their children, what we've noticed is that everything else gets put on the back burner. So that goes back to this question about, you know, how staff can support people and what that should look like. And so I think as providers, we get into this tailspin because we're frustrated. We're like, I want to help you do this, this, and this, but they're like, one of my basic needs is not being met. So even if they're in a shelter, that's just not the same as having their own stable housing. Yeah. And so we all know there's just not enough affordable housing options in general, but especially for families with multiple children. We have to start with looking at the emotional impact that the lack of safe and affordable housing has on families. And please know, I do not negate the importance of housing for everyone, but there seems to be more options for individuals, single individuals, than there are for families. And so they don't show up on our radar as much because they couch surf. But we're seeing the impact of that, right? In school settings, at food pantries, at meal sites, et cetera. So we see it show up in, like I said, school settings, transient families, that leads to educational, poor educational outcomes. And poor people are paying more than the recommended 30% of their income for housing, which means there is just a lot of other things not being met in families' lives that just lead to this imbalance.
So Martina, you just gave a great list, and it's not exhaustive, right, of the challenges that people are facing every day and how that contributes, it undermines their mental wellness. And I just want to acknowledge that, 2020 has put more stressors on a greater percentage of people than would have previously identified those stressors, right? Right. And again, disproportionately impacted certain segments of society. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to give a moment to reflect on what 2020, what this year of layers of different stressors and traumas individually and as communities and as a society we've experienced, and how as mental health providers and as housing providers, we see that showing up. And so not only how is it showing up, how are these things more dramatic in this year, but also what has, again, I'd love to hear a few examples from folks of, what does it look like to help people navigate this? What does it look like to reduce stress? What does it look like in a day-to-day interaction to give people who are maybe a little less familiar with the concept something really practical to understand? And Omkar, I'll start with you.
I think the very first thing that comes to mind is grief. Is how do we bring a grief lens to our work? The dominant culture is so oriented towards, more and achieving and productivity that and new and shiny, right? That we miss and we often don't integrate, the pain and the sadness and the loss into that integration work doesn't happen, right? At the sort of the innovation is the sense of newness, and the integration is like, how do we connect? How do we and trauma, one way of thinking of trauma that comes from Tara Brach is, trauma is about like separation, right? Our connected systems are separated in some way, and the healing is about reconnecting. And so often the reconnecting is about connecting with the pain and the sadness. And I think of grief as being, in a simple way, the space between what we want or what is ideal and what we have right now. So through that lens, we're all processing some kind of grief, right? I didn't get the validation that I wanted. I didn't get, I didn't get to see my family this year. The resident that I really care about, I really want them to be successful, but they're not because of their substance abuse. So there's constant grief. And so if there's ways that organizations can weave in, whether formal or cultural ways of integrating grief into our work, so that everything doesn't have to be, hey, I'm so happy it's Friday, I can't wait till the weekend, at least it's sunny, but we're able to, in a contained way. Now, this is incredibly challenging, right? Because we don't want to just come in and dump everything with each other, and everyone's exhausted emotionally, and it's not trauma informed. But how do we practice this? Like, I'm really sad. I don't need anything from you. I just want you to know that. It's like, okay, let me know how I can support you. Like, how do we create a culture and communication around ways that integrate the grief? And the outcomes will be that we may not sort of do as much in a sense that we're just doing to do, but the work that we do will be getting at the core of the issues, and the work that we do will be more sustainable, right?
Omkar, I understand. I think it was last week was like National Grief Recognition Month or something, and I just heard a program that was talking about like a collective understanding of the experience of grief in 2020 being really profound, right? Because virtually, if you're alive right now, you're aware of loss of all sorts, job loss of individuals, loss of freedom, loss of control. And there's a bunch of ways that we feel this interconnectedness, right? And to not ignore that, I think, is the message I'm hearing from you. You don't have to wallow in it, say in a professional setting, but to acknowledge that human experience that we're all sharing right now.
Yeah, and to give a real specific example that might be helpful is, if you're working with a resident and they really want to move, let's say, and they want a different housing situation, and you're so caught up in what you want to do for them that you don't pause to realize, like, oh, I don't have any power in this situation, and I have to grieve the fact that, like, they may want something, but I can't give it to them. And it'll keep you from doing this excess work. Sometimes we're kind of pulled into doing more to avoid the pain. And so,
Walter, thank you, Omkar. I really appreciate that specific example. It's helpful to be able to hear something concrete sometimes as an example. Walter, can you talk a little bit about the experience of living through 2020? And go ahead. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Omkar. I had a lot of thoughts. I want to almost stop and reflect on them for a minute, but I know we've got like 17 minutes left. But I'll kind of enter in through that particular thought. Doing a couple things. Doing less is good. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. It really is. We're in a place that none of us have ever experienced ever. And all of us who are service providers, you know, we get frenzied. We want to do more and more and more and more and more because out of the compassion to serve. And I found, particularly through my pastoral hat, that there is not that expectation. People have been deeply appreciative of the intention to create that culture, create space for slowing down, create space for grace, I'll say. And so the things that have been helpful for me in that role in particular is creating some new rituals. So there's some consistency and some normalcy. So we have like a prayer line that meets 3 times a day, 5 a.m., 8 a.m., 8 p.m. I never make the 5 a.m. because I'm sleeping, except today because I got up eager for this. But it's created a routine and a ritual for people to plug in, one, and also for them to plug in collectively. And so in those spaces, we've got, you know, as few as 5, sometimes as many as 15 or 20, just varying. There's no pressure. You got to be there. It's none of that. When you want to plug in, here's where you can plug in and connect with people in a non-threatening, non-intrusive, non-demanding, come and share whatever you want to. And so I think that's been it's been very powerful. I've been humbled by that because I am somebody who, you know, wants to do more. What more can I do? And the people that I serve are so grateful for the intentionality. You've thought about us. You've put a framework in place that can help us move forward. I mentioned grace, being graceful to yourselves, being graceful to ourselves, not being so hard on ourselves and one another. Again, we've never experienced this ever. So we're in a high stress. I don't know how many aces you capture with pandemic and protest and presidential conflict. You know, those have to be on the list. And so being gracious with ourselves and with one another has been very, very helpful. And again, I've watched, because I've learned this in particular, wearing this leadership hat and speaking to organizations, what it means for an organization to shape culture over time, because it's an institution. Individuals can do certain things, but organizations set a framework. They set a culture. It doesn't have to be deep and profound, but the consistency tells a story about who we are. And so, hey, at Common Bond, they always, you know, create a space in the first 5 minutes for us to check in, or, you know, every Tuesday, Thursday. No, you can't do donuts because we're meeting virtually. You know, once a month, they send us a note card. I'm making this up, guys. But you know, there's
notes, Walter.
But people are appreciative more than we might think. And this all connects together of the intentionality. You have thought about me and what's going on me, not in some perfect way. You couldn't do it all, but I see you trying. And I think there's rich value in that. So I start with the front end though. Don't do it in a manner that you stress yourself out, because then that'll make its way into your people. Whatever you can do reasonably well or okay, do that. That's what I found to be very, very helpful.
Thank you, Walter. So Walter has kind of switched us, and I appreciate it, into a mode of there's some advice and counsel being offered here. And I'm also noticing the time. We did want to keep a few minutes at the end for some questions from folks who have joined us. And so Martina, so I'm just going to give each of you like 1 quick minute to make a final point or reflection that you would like to make. It can be a piece of advice like Walter. It could be an example of work that you've seen that's been profound. It can be a reflection on 2020. It can be an idea for public policy, whatever it is. What's a choice nugget that you wanted to get out in this discussion today that you haven't yet had a chance to get out? And I'll start with Martina.
Thank you, Deidre. You know, one of the things that has really come to the surface around mental health in the community is that people need. And so there are so many people doing wonderful work that are creating these opportunities for connection. And we do that as well. But a lot of the work that has started and has to continue is getting people what they need. And I just live in that world. So since March 18th, I've hit the ground running. And what has come to the surface as a best practice, and I'm sharing this, is that we need to create more community hubs so people don't have to wonder where they can get food, PPE, resources. We've created hubs and ways to deliver and drop off what people need, right? Because not everybody can go. We often think about this as people who have cars and who have extra. So I just share that what has risen to the top is that the need is great, and that we've had to reorganize how we provide support and support mental health support. So all these things that I mentioned, food, PPE, resources, et cetera, that decreases mental distress. And so we really have to be creative right now so that we can start meeting the need, in addition to making sure people have a safe, affordable place to live. But when they're there, there's other needs, and how do we get that to people? So I encourage people to come together. We have groups that are doing things different than we've ever done in our community, and it is showing results. And as a result, we're being very creative in getting people what they need when they need it in real time.
Thank you, Martina. I really appreciate that idea of a hub. I'm going to ask Walter for you to go next. Can you try to be even briefer?
Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
I'm going to give you a challenge.
That's no, I can do it. You to give me yes, I can do that. I would just go back. I'll echo again what Martina said is the concept of building community, whether it's with your peers, taking a moment to build community, whether it's with those who are coming in to get services, but being very intentional about here's a community right now. And in this moment in time, if it's the four of us on the screen, it's just the four of us. If it's the two of us having an interaction, it's just the two of us, to see ourselves as community, especially in times like these where the environment is so toxic. So thinking importantly about building community.
Thank you, Walter. I really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today. Omkar, I'm going to let you close out with a final thought, and please, brief.
Yeah, so brief. I feel like organizations like Common Bond that are doing similar work the work is in three areas. One is with residents or your clients, within the organization, the culture and the systems, and then how you relate to organizations outside of yourself, like the advocacy. And all of that work, I feel like, is happening through this complex frame of these intersections of culture, identity, mental health, and trauma, like race, gender, sexuality. And so that's how I conceptualize all of this.
Great, thank you. I appreciate your patience, y'all. I know we could spend days in this conversation. I really appreciate your time today and these insights. And I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Derek to do some Q&A here from things we've heard from attendees.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We did have one question that I'd like to offer up to the group. An attendee noted that often, as we're asking participants or members of the community who are presenting to seek services or supports, to engage really with bureaucratic systems or structures. And in that way, often we ask them to repeat their stories of trauma to get access to these services. The question was, is there a recommendation that anyone from the panel has about how we might be able to reduce those barriers for folks who are coming to seek our support?
I'll say briefly that somebody with authority has to give staff permission to do that. That's in part a cultural thing that goes back a little bit to what I talked about, complexity and compliance, both of which are real, but how do we do those in ways that those are served, but the person in front of us is served first? That's a part of a organizational culture, in my view.
I have a sort of an example I'll share briefly that kind of really breaks my heart. I was working with a client who was struggling with homelessness when I was doing case management and had psychotic symptoms and voices that told him to end his life sometimes. And I took him to the hospital, and, you know, as a Black man, the way the intake of the system worked, he ended up getting escalated, and a hospitalization could have been prevented. And so we just need to, even at a minimum, start to see the ways that this is happening, how race, and be able to talk about race. And so often people aren't even on the same page to be able to even notice and start to see these things. And so I feel deeply that we have to see and understand and notice where our power is and our allies are before we can make deep and sustainable change.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say quickly that Milwaukee County, we are a large community and we don't do anything like anyone else in Wisconsin. But when COVID hit, we came together, philanthropic, county government, and community-based organizations all at the same table. And we started to figure out how we can move things forward and decrease some of the bureaucracy. We have moved money like we have never moved it before. We have gotten it to small mom and pop organizations. We cut out all the red tape for applying for funding. And it has changed how we do business. And we are all committed to saying, we're not going back to the same old, same old. And we have the right players at the table to make that happen. So I just encourage people as a community to just make a stand and say what we're going to do different. If Milwaukee can do it, anyone can do it.
There's a question here that asks really that, this person mentions that they find that often it can be hard to connect people that might be in your network that are struggling. So you might know someone through work, through family, through community who's struggling, and you might have a challenge identifying how to connect with them, how to connect them with the resources. What should people look for in regard to where somebody might not be served well by the system of care, and how do they help support that person in finding what they need? And this will be our last question. Martina, maybe I'll turn that to you.
I heard two things. And so I think the first part that I thought I heard was, how do you connect people in your network or in your family? And I think that is always a unique challenge. And so, stigma exists in all communities across age, race, ethnicity, etc. What I have found is that people want to know that they matter. And that sounds so ridiculously simple, but it's so true. And you can show people that they matter by just planting little seeds and resources, like really great mental health podcasts, like what we do at Mental Health America, or sharing resources, just planting the seed. So that's part A. Part B, Derek, remind me, I just lost my train of thought just that quick. What was the second half of that?
Somebody engaging with the system, but they're struggling, maybe falling through the cracks a little bit.
Yep.
How do you help direct them or support them
Yep.
to get what they need?
That happens a lot, and I'm sure Omkar could speak to this as well. That happens. Unfortunately, systems are not perfect, but I think if someone is connected to a service and a service provider, we have a responsibility. And so maybe the system isn't perfect, but they're connected to you. And so it's really on some level our responsibility in that space to give them as much as we possibly can. We do not just only do this one piece, even though, it may not all fall under our purview. If you're telling me housing, I'm going to help support you get you to the resources. We no longer, as we talk about a healthy community, we can no longer say, that's not my job, that's not my role, I don't know. Shame on you if that's your perspective. And so to your point, the system's broken. So we have to do our darndest to support them with the resources that we have. And again, sometimes it's just being there. And that's what people remember. No, Martina didn't have all the answers, but she was there. And that really sometimes makes such a big difference.
Thank you for that. Well, we've hit the top of the next hour. So thank you, everyone, so much. I'd like to thank each of our panelists, Martina, Walter, and Omkar, for sharing your perspective, your expertise, your experience with the group. I think this is a tremendously rich discussion and wouldn't have been so without you. So thank you so much. Thank you, Deidre, for your skilled facilitation as always, deeply appreciated. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Catalyst Construction, Hush Blackwell, U.S. Bank, and U.S. Bank Wealth Management. We deeply appreciate your support. And to all of our attendees, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day. We know our busy times, and we appreciate you joining us to engage with this conversation. Please do stay tuned for a follow-up email to all of our attendees which will have links to the bios and the organizations that our speakers are involved with. So you can definitely learn more, as well as contact information if you have a follow-up for a connection, a resource, etc. And again, thank you all for a rich conversation and for spending your time today in the Common Bond Community's 3rd Annual Affordable Housing Forum. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great day.